Hello, hi to those now entering the Zoom room. Uh, my name is Morgan, and I am an event manager with Politics and Prose, and I'd like to welcome you all to PNP Live. Soon, I will drop a link in the chat for where you can order a copy of all of our panelists' books tonight, straight from PNP's website. You can ask our speakers a question by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can towards the end of the program. But we apologize in advance if we don't have time to address your question. Also, there are auto captions for the event by hitting the live caption button at the bottom of your screen as well. Let's introduce tonight's guests. Mia McKenzie is the award-winning author of The Summer We Got Free and the creator of Black Girl Dangerous Media, an independent media and education project that centers queer Black women and girls. Skye Falling is her second novel. LaTanya McQueen has an MFA from Emerson College, a PhD from the University of Missouri, and was a 2017 through 2018 Robert P. Dana Emerging Writer Fellow at Cornell College. Currently, she is an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Coe College. She published an essay collection titled "And It Begins Like This" and has been featured in Best American Essays, Carve Magazine, and Bennington Review. When the Reckoning Comes is her first novel. You might notice that Jayne Allen was on the ticket, and unfortunately, it looks like she couldn't be here tonight at the last minute. We'll still put a link in the chat for Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. But first, we will hear reading from our two panelists. Mia, would you like to go first and read from Skye Falling?
Sure.
Great.
All right, so I'm just gonna read, well, thanks for having me. Thanks for the intro. Thanks for everybody for being here. This is my novel, Skye Falling, and I'm just going to read the first few pages, first scene of the book. Can you hear me good? Is my sound good?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Chapter 1. I'm lying very still on top of a hotel bed's rumpled sheets. My mouth is slack, my eyes are open, my stare is cold and lifeless. If anyone looked down on me from overhead right now, they'd think I'm dead, and it probably wouldn't be a huge shock. I'm pretty sure no one who knows me would be like, wow, I never imagined her life would end like this. I always thought she'd die at a ripe old age, surrounded by 17 great-grandchildren. Because no one thinks that. I don't even think that myself. I've never really been the surrounded by 17 great-grandchildren type. In junior high, my classmates voted me most likely to be single, which, like, what even is that? I spent all of recess sulking in the library, feeling deeply misunderstood. It didn't help that I hadn't been voted 1, most liked, 2, most ride or die homie, 3, most likely to marry the cute one from Color Me Bad. And while being voted most likely to be single at 12 years old isn't necessarily an early indicator that one might die alone in a hotel bed many years later, it's not hard to imagine it as part of the same narrative, right? Not that you'd expect it, but if you heard about it, you'd be like, okay, I can see that. So yeah, nobody would be super surprised, is what I'm saying. Plot twist, I'm not dead, I'm just really hungover. I snort and sit up straight in the bed. The sudden movement sends a wave of nausea through me, and I close my eyes and take a long, deep breath, trying not to puke. When it passes, I squint hazily around the room. It's a nice room in a nice little bed and breakfast called Naradora. The niceness of it is somewhat diminished, though, by the greasy, crumpled up takeout bags I keep forgetting to throw in the trash, and the suitcases open on the floor, spilling out dirty socks and underwear. In my defense, I just got done leading a 2-week-long group trip to Southern Africa for Black travelers for We Out Here, the company I own. The trip back to Philly from Zimbabwe was 23 hours long, and I've been recovering from the flights for a week and 3 days, during which time I couldn't possibly have been expected to clean up after myself. A purple thong hangs out of a carry-on, crotch side up. I squint at it through eyes that are blurry both because I'm not wearing my glasses and because they're burning in my head like little balls of fire. I rub them with my fists like a sleepy kid. There's movement beside me and I jump a little. There's a naked man lying next to me, sleeping with a smile on his face. I try to remember who he is, but after a few moments of racking my brain, I give up. I decide I will never drink again, probably. There's a knock on the door. I look over at the sleeping man. You expecting someone? The man, who is light brown and has a muscular ass, doesn't answer. I look around for my glasses, don't see them, get up, get out of bed, feel another intense wave of nausea, stumble, trip over a suitcase, and fall face first onto the floor. Motherfucker. I get to the door and squint through the peephole, which is pointless since I can't see shit. Skye, it's Viva. Viva Robinson is a friend of mine from high school who owns this nice B&B. Because I'm bad at keeping in touch, she's one of the few friends I still have in Philly. I'm about to open the door when I remember there's a naked dude in the bed. I grab the sheet and cover him from head to toe. Maybe she won't notice. Vive, I say as I open the door, I can't find my glasses. Allá, no estás vestida, she says. This is when I realize I answered the door in a camisole and a thong. I'm not embarrassed. I don't have many bits that Viva hasn't already seen, but her tone suggests there's something I'm supposed to be dressed for, and I have no idea what that is. I guess my cluelessness shows on my face because she says, art sale. Oh, see, it's all coming back to me now. A year ago, one of our other high school friends, Naima, quit her job bookkeeping to do art full time, which I only know because Viva told me. She's still friends with some of the people we kicked it with in high school, like actual friends, not just social media friends. I haven't seen Naima or almost anyone we went to high school with since graduation, except in passing. But for some reason, I can't recall now, when Viva asked me to go to Naima's art sale with her, I said I would. It's at 11, Viva says, remember? Of course I do. Nah, I don't. I just need like 10 to get ready, 15 tops. I move toward the bathroom as Viva comes farther inside the room. I catch her eyeing my mess. Have you thought about getting an apartment? I turn to look at her. I'm only in Philly for a couple of weeks every few months between trips, which I guess makes it my base, but getting a whole ass apartment feels like more permanent than I'd like. Is this your way of telling me I've worn out my welcome? Viva shakes her head. Glad okay, no. Good, because I love this place. The theme of the bed and breakfast is famous Black and Puerto Rican women writers, and the 6 rooms here are styled after the works of Zora Neale Hurston, Loda Rodriguez de Tio, Lorraine Hansberry, Julia de Burgos, Gwendolyn Brooks, and Gloria Naylor. My current room, the Zora Neale Hurston room, has a late 1930s chaise made of ebony and upholstered in deep pink velvet, a tall, narrow, dark finished oak armoire that reminds me of playing hide and seek as a child, framed book covers from Jonah's gourd vine, Their Eyes Were Watching God, and Moses, Man of the Mountain hanging on the walls, and a painting of Zora herself, grinning in a feather hat and fur-collared coat. I love being here, surrounded by all this. Plus, Viva and her husband, Jason, who helps manage the place, let me stay for mad cheap. I just don't know how you survive on French fries for 2 weeks at a stretch, she continues, pointing to a particularly greasy bag. The potato is a vegetable, I'm pretty sure. I worry about you sometimes, she says. Ew, you sound like somebody's mother. Not mine, you understand, but somebody's. She laughs. Well, you're almost 40, Chica, and you don't even have a toaster. I shrug. Luckily, it's the 21st century, and I can procure crunchy bread at any number of establishments throughout the city. Also, and this is really important, Viva, I'm 38 3/4, not almost fucking 40. And with that, I take my ass to the shower. I'm in there trying not to throw up when I hear a scream of surprise, and I figure Viva and the naked guy are making each other's acquaintance.
Thank you, Mia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And LaTanya, if you can go ahead and read from your novel as well.
Yeah. So my novel, just a little bit about it. So it is, I guess it's sort of described as a literary Southern Gothic horror with elements of speculative. And it's centered around this protagonist, Mira, who is going back to her hometown of Gibson to attend the wedding of her childhood friend, Celine, who is white, and Mira's Black. And then when she goes back, the wedding is being held on this plantation that has been renovated to provide guests with like a antebellum-esque experience, complete with like reenactments. So she's going back, and this plantation also too, it has this history of being haunted by these slaves who are seeking revenge on the descendants of those who once owned them. So it's this larger question of like, what is happening? Is this real? And who are they going to take their revenge on? So I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning. It's very, very short. And it's part of the opening. Celine was getting married. They hadn't needed to keep in touch for Mira to know how much this wedding meant. As teenagers, Celine filled their spare conversations with talk of gowns and decorations, flavors of cake and themes. Mira entertained the fantasy with her. They had such little in their lives that the dream of a wedding felt extravagant. They'd linger in the magazine aisle of the supermarket, flipping through the bridal pages as they scanned the dresses. Sheath or A-line, mermaid or ball gown, sequins, lace. Celine searched for the perfect one, always thinking she found it to later find another. They were all beautiful, Mira told her. They were all already perfect. But for Celine, it was about more than the dress. The wedding was a chance for her to be seen as someone worthy, as beautiful, as deserving of the attention spent. Still, they weren't teenagers anymore, and it had been a decade since she'd seen Celine, almost as long as the heyday of their friendship. They hadn't been friends for a long time, but Mira wondered about all of those years in the beginning. How long did the sense of obligation to someone last? Did she owe it to Celine to come to her wedding if they'd once been friends? Oh, I don't know what I'll do if you're not there, Celine continued on the phone, and the knot of guilt wrangled inside of her. Celine told her the wedding would be during the height of summer. Mira mentally mapped out the logistics of the trip, allowing herself to entertain the possibility. Of course, she'd have to find something in her closet to wear, buy a dress on sale if she couldn't. A summer wedding meant she wouldn't have to take off from teaching. It was not a long drive from Winston-Salem. It would take a couple of hours if she didn't hit any traffic, a half day at most. If she left early enough, it wouldn't be so bad. A new dress, the cost of gas, and the expense of a hotel for a night or two. She could afford all that, so it wasn't a question of if she could or couldn't go. The real question was if she wanted to, and she couldn't say she did, not with any real sense of authority. If it's the money, don't worry about it. I'll pay for your room. I can send you money for your travel too. Anything you need, Mira, just let me know. All you have to do is come. Mira bristled. Was this another insult hiding underneath? She couldn't be sure. You don't have to pay for my travel. I can afford it. Oh, I didn't mean, I know you can afford it, but free is always better, isn't it? What about your room? It's the least I can do. They've made these sweet-sized cottages on the property. I'm sure you'll love it. Wait, Mira said. It hadn't occurred to her to ask where the wedding would be. She'd assumed it'd be at the country club right on the border of the town, near the golf course and the old moneyed homes, but the mention of cottages threw her off. Where are you having this? This millionaire bought and renovated the old Woodsman property. It's become a pretty popular touristy place since it opened. We're going to be the first to have our wedding there, which is a little exciting when you think about it. Celine, you can't be serious, Mira blurted, refusing to hide her disapproval. You can't possibly be having your wedding at that plantation. You wouldn't even recognize it now, Celine responded, missing Mira's point. The property has been completely redone. Celine should have known it wasn't about what the place looked like, but then Celine hadn't been with them that day, only heard the story afterward like everyone else. Mira and Jesse were the ones who'd snuck off, and in the time since, who knew what it had become? The history rewritten, erased, having become something entirely new. This was what Celine was trying to convince Mira of as she pressed the phone against her cheek and thought back to a past she'd hoped to forget, to the girl she'd been, and to the friend she'd loved. Thank you.
Thank you, LaTanya. I want to make sure, Mia, you get a chance to give us a quick synopsis of your book. But the first question I have for both of you is to maybe talk a little bit more about your main characters and how you decided that they were actually going to lead the story being told in your novels.
Question, but I want Mia. Mia, can you talk a little bit about like the synopsis of your book, though?
Yeah, sorry, I was kind of skip the part. So yeah, so Skye Falling, it's about a woman, Skye, who she's a loner. She owns a travel company. She spends a lot of time traveling, and she's very kind of disconnected. And she, on one of her trips home to Philly, where she's from, where's her base, she is approached by a 12-year-old who says that she's the product of an egg Skye donated when she was in her 20s. And so Skye, who is, again, really sort of disconnected and a loner, she decides to try to have a relationship with the kid. And through this relationship, she kind of opens herself up to a lot of things. And so it's kind of about her journey from disconnection to connection. So that's the synopsis. And how Skye, I think Skye kind of came to me a really long time ago, when I first got the idea for a story about an egg donor, a long time ago, and it kind of like stayed with me over time. And I kind of was interested in a woman who would sort of be an egg donor, but kind of donated and kind of not think about it anymore, and who that woman might be. Because we have a lot of stories, I think, especially kind of like movies and TV about like sperm donors, but there's nothing ever about egg donors. And it's always like, haha, like a guy, he donates a sperm and oh wow, there are these kids and it's funny, but nobody ever is never like that with egg donors. And I think this just because of the ways we think about women and women in attachment to offspring and things like that. So I was interested in a character who might donate her eggs and then kind of just forget about it, and kind of what that woman might be like, or a version of her. And that's kind of when Skye came to me, and she came to me as a really strong voice. And so writing the book with her as the main character really came easily in terms of the voice, because she's sort of quirky and particular and weird and funny, and she thinks a lot of things that she doesn't say, but there's always like a lot of things going on in her head, and a lot of the humor is in her kind of internal dialogue. And it's always sort of fun to play with a character who is saying one thing and thinking another at the exact same time, and kind of all the humor that can come from that. So that's kind of where Skye came from, and it's been really cool to kind of tell a story through her.
It's interesting because like I think when I think about like stories that involve like women and like egg donation, like they are often like white stories. Right. So it's interesting to me to see a story like that is about a similar issue, but from a black character, right? Because I don't think we get that narrative very often in like media representation. So that's really interesting to me. It's also, I wish Jayne was here, because I do think, and I'm glad also too that this question, that the first question that was brought up was in relation to like protagonists, right? Because I do think all of our books are very, very different, but they all center on Black women protagonists, and there are sort of similar issues. I think the characters are different, but like there's parallels, I think, in like how the protagonists sort of think about the world and are like navigating the world. And that part of me wonders if maybe that's just like part of me wonders how much of that is from the book or how much of that is just sort of coming off of just what it means to be a Black woman in the US. But anyway, in terms of my book, I was interested in a protagonist who is sort of, she has been sort of like, she has been conditioned to believe that if you behave a certain way, if you act a certain way, if you do the, like, if you sort of assimilate into these larger sort of behaviors that are expected of you, then you will be absolved from racism, right? So largely respectability politics. And so she navigates the world, and like her interactions with others are all sort of under this philosophy. And like, so for me, like, part of this horror of this book is like, you have this character who has really made herself small to such as this extreme point, to the point that she doesn't even know who she is anymore. And she has to sort of come to terms with how much of that is also too like a larger function of the white gaze, and also to white supremacy, right? And how the ways in which she thinks about her behaviors, and as well as in which she treats other people based on like this sort of assumption, is a function of white supremacy. So I was thinking about that in terms of this character. So I guess I'm not sure if that answers your question. I think a little bit, but I did have a question. I guess like for Mia, because both of our, like, I'm curious about like what, like, did you kind of like what struggles you had in terms of trying, or if you did have any, in terms of trying to write a Black female protagonist? And I guess for me, like, I was thinking a lot about like stereotypes and representations, right? And I don't know, I guess I wondered if you went through that too, in terms of thinking about like how to portray this character, and were there any sort of obstacles that you came up across in that? Does that make sense? I don't know.
I think it makes sense. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think for me, part of the challenge is like, I think a lot about, you know, what you're saying is really interesting in terms of like thinking about what your characters are making herself smaller because of the white gaze and white supremacy and all the, I think so much and write so much about all the ways that Black women, and this is in this book and also in the book that I'm writing now, the ways that we have to make ourselves smaller and all the things that we can't show because of, you know, whatever ways will be, you know, whatever things will be called if we show kind of the full range of like human emotions. And so, yeah, I think a lot about kind of in this book and really in all my writing about that, and how to create characters that are, because you there's this one thing about like, oh, a stereotype, but then there's this other thing about really wanting to have like a representation that feels authentic to you, and like someone that you really want to write about, and someone that you really want to read about. And so for me, it's been about trying to, because I know in my life have lived so much with that, like being made smaller, to not bring it into the writing as much as possible, and in the writing to say I'm gonna create the most like interesting character that I can, that is the most interesting person to read about, and I'm gonna try to like turn off the gaze. I'm gonna try to ignore the gaze at least as much as I can. I mean, it's hard to do, but I think I've just found for me that it's more, the more I embrace kind of the crazy, I think it's the craziness that I'm trying to embrace. I'm trying to sort of how we're sort of this is getting into a whole thing, but like this thing about sort of like the range of human emotions and like when you can't show them, how it sort of makes you crazy, right? It makes you crazy. You just can't be right when you're not able to like be fully human in the world. And so trying to remember that and embrace that, and in the writing when creating characters, you know, just try to remember how important it is to have Black women characters, especially, who are able to feel and show all of those ranges of emotions, or at least be in conversation in the book about why they're not, or whatever, but not try to, you know, not make the mistake of kind of making them smaller myself, you know what I'm saying? Because everybody else does, I guess. Yeah, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it's so interesting because I try to think about like what, like if I wasn't, so like my book is very much about the white gaze, right? So I'm trying to kind of think about like what would another book look like without sort of this idea, right? Just sort of Black people just living and existing and like telling their stories. And I wonder if I guess this is why this book is really interesting to me, because like I do wonder, like at least for me, what, like, I guess my fear in trying to do something like that would be like, how much am I letting that, whether or not I'm aware or not, influence like the depictions of these characters? I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. You know, one of my favorite book is The Color Purple. And I feel like in a way, every novel I write is a version of it in the way that like I learned from Alice Walker, you did, in the way that Black women find liberation through their relationships with other Black women, right? And so one thing that's really, I mean, there's so many powerful things in The Color Purple. One thing that has stuck with me long years is Shug Avery, right? And so Shug Avery, who is this character who is what I'm describing in terms of like, you know, that could be seen, you know, she's like, like she likes to fuck, you know, she likes to drink, like she likes to do, you know, do all the things that we're told that we don't want to let the white people see us, you know, like we have to be, you know, she's the opposite of respectable in every possible way, right? And she's so powerful, and so in this book, Skye Falling, I think Faye, the character, the love interest character, is very much a take on Shug Avery. And when I'm writing that character, like all along the way, I'm thinking, okay, how can I just want to push, I just want to keep pushing in terms, you know, like in terms of what, because Faye starts out, she seems sort of very buttoned up and very reserved when Skye meets her, and she, over the course of the book, we learn lots of things about her and her past and her kind of ways of doing things that are surprising and just and to me, so I just let her have like the full range of kind of a human experience, and without kind of trying to make her respectable. And so, yeah, I mean, I just think a lot about that. And to me, in the end, I feel like those are the characters that for me end up being the ones that stay with me the longest and have kind of the greatest impact on my writing. So I think you can. I mean, I think if you're writing a book about that is in many ways, but and also I'm not writing, Skye isn't a book really about the where the white gaze is really a factor. So it's different when you're writing kind of in that, where that's already kind of part of the story that you're writing. I think it's very different. I don't think I haven't written a novel where the white gaze is like a part of kind of what's going on in the story. So I think that's probably a very different thing.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like we both have there's like similarities, but like we're kind of coming at it from these completely different ways, and it's like different also two genres and everything. Yeah. I took over with my questions. I'm so sorry.
No, please keep going. Yeah, I'm enjoying this conversation.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm just interested, like if you're yeah, like I'm really interested in the story, in how you as a writer, you're writing with kind of the white gaze in mind, in a genre, kind of in a horror setting, which is I'm just really interested in how you decided to write that story. Yeah, where did that come from? Like where did that come from?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think well, there's like a couple of things, right? Like I wrote another book. I wrote an essay collection, and as part of that collection, I went and I visited a bunch of plantations in the South. And if you go and like, they're all very similar in terms of how they operate, but a lot of them are like how they're depicted in the book. Like they almost feel like caricatures. Like they play up. I mean, people have weddings on them. They're centered on like the big house, right? They're crafting a narrative, and they are very much about catering to white audiences, right? And I couldn't stop thinking about that. And my essay collection was very much sort of kind of thinking about these larger ideas about how Black people are seen and the ways in which they have to shift in response to, right, like how they're seen. And so I was still so part of the book is carrying over ideas from that, but then also too, I lived in Missouri, where they had during the protests that happened on University of Missouri. I was also there during Michael Brown. So kind of in the background was these larger sort of conversations about police violence towards Black people. And every time that conversation kind of comes around, there's usually somebody will sort of make a comment about like how it's a good thing that Black people do not want revenge, right, for these things that have happened for them. It's a good thing they want justice and not revenge. And so I was thinking about that. So that was also too kind of in the background. And I had also written another book, and at the time I was like querying for this other novel, and a lot of their responses were like the way in which they were thinking about the book or reasons why they rejected the book were sort of centered around wanting me to change it to cater to white audiences. And so I was thinking about that, and like how this larger question of like, who am I writing for and why? And so I thought it would be interesting to write a book where that's part of it, right? And so like using the sort of horror premise, or part of the premise, like part of what like people are interested in is this, like that idea, right? That Black people are going to rise up, they're going to seek revenge. Like that's part of the horror premise, which is very much like a white gay sort of premise. And so I was interested in sort of taking that and exploiting it, right? And like looking at really way in which ways in which historically white people have enacted violence, right, on Black people, and looking at through all of these different, I guess, perspectives, the ways in which white supremacy has worked, right? So we think about it historically, we think about it we're seeing it through the present, through the way in which Black people are treated on this renovated plantation, right? And how they're seen. We're also too seeing it through like my protagonist, Mira, how she thinks of herself in reaction to being seen, but also too, like the way in which she treats other people. Like she's very much, she also too has her own biases, and she also too needs a reckoning in this similar sort of way. So it was a bunch of sort of things kind of coming together. But yeah, like it's you know, I guess I've been thinking about this in terms of like another, like a book that isn't, like if I read another book, right, that is not sort of thinking about like these larger sort of ideas, and it's just sort of Black people existing, like what, like I'm trying to kind of think of like what that would look like from my perspective, I guess. And so I did want to ask you though, because like this is your second book, right? And so I'm curious about, did you have like, what was the process similar for writing like your first one and your second one?
Well, I don't know. You know, when I write books, it takes forever. And people often ask me like about the process. And by the time they ask me, I don't even remember what the process was, because the process was so many things. My way of writing a book is kind of just like chaos and then like some moments of calm. So when I wrote my first book, I didn't have kids yet, but it just was a book that it kind of evolved over many years. And so over those many years, it was just a lot of different things. You know, sometimes you're on a like a really good schedule, or you're like, you know, you're just on it and things are moving. And then sometimes it's just like pandemonium. And then the second book had kids. I had one kid as I was starting to write it, and had another kid during the process of writing. And so then that's just like whenever you can get a minute, whenever you can like find some time, you know, to do something. But like, yeah, I mean, I think I think what starts out for me, and maybe this is the same for you, or I don't know if it is, but with like some woman will come into my head, and then, you know, a character, and she'll talk to me, and I just begin to kind of hear from her. And then from there, she kind of starts to become a character. And then how, you know, it takes however long it takes to make a story out of it. But yeah, I think my process is still just kind of, you know, all over the place, but that's kind of where it starts. And yeah.
How long did this one take? You said the book, like
this one ended up taking like, I want to say 3 years or something, 3.5 years. Yeah, which felt like, I mean, it felt like it was moving really quickly, and then kids happened, and then it was just like inching along. I expected it to be done way faster than that. But yeah, it ended up being like 3 or 3.5 years. How long did it take to write your book?
Mine was very different. Like, so I wrote a draft of it in a couple of months, and then we spent with my agent about a year revising it.
That's awesome. What's your process like? Because I need some of that process for myself.
Right, but like I tell people that, right? And it sounds exciting, right? But like I've written so many other things. Like I wrote another novel that was like my dissertation, and I couldn't sell it. And then I wrote like a story collection. And then that was way back during the financial crisis, and then publishing also too sort of was like collapsing, we felt like, and so nobody was buying anything. And then, you know, and I wrote like an essay, all right, so I've written a whole bunch of stuff, like it's taken me a while to kind of get to the point of a novel, but like this one, and I do think in some ways, like at the point when I was starting this book, I sort of just was like, I'm just gonna do whatever I want, and then like maybe it'll work out.
Yeah.
But like I was talking to some other people like about who have written like multiple books, and they sort of have been saying like they feel like with every book that they like it's a completely different thing, like they have to sort of start over. So that's why I wanted to ask you, because like you have like 2, right? And so I wanted to know if that was true, if it's like the same sort of thing where you have to start over each time, because that seems really daunting to me.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I guess it kind of is. I mean, I feel like you learn a lot though, and or maybe you learn. I feel like after the first one that I knew a lot, I had learned a lot. I don't know necessarily that I could apply it though. It's like, oh, I have all these lessons from writing it, but shit, I don't know. I'm just sorry. I don't know if I'm sorry about my language on prose and politics. But yeah, I'm not sure if I was able to apply it the second time, because it is so new. I mean, it's just so brand new. The story, the characters, the point of view, like the first novel is like a third person attached to different members of the family, and the second novel is, you know, a first person narrative. So it's just it's just one is set in like, it's like in the past, and one is set, you know, now. So it's just like they're so different that it is kind of like you're just starting from scratch. But I wonder, like with your book, because you said that, yeah, I wonder so this is a question that I think about a lot, and I wonder with you, like who do you think you're writing for when you sat down and you wrote this book? Like who did you imagine was the person reading the book?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So I guess like twofold. Like I was thinking about, so like part of it is thinking about Black people, and like Black people who sort of feel like they can't, like Black people who feel like they sort of want to sit out working towards fighting against oppression, right? And feeling like that it doesn't also to involve them, right? So I guess part of like the underlying theme of this book is that we're all sort of in this together, and like these issues affect us all together, and you can't sit it out, right? And as well as like thinking about how the ways in which the white gaze affects how we think of ourselves, but how we treat other people, and like recognizing that and actively working to change this thinking, change this behavior. So I was hoping to reach people, or to reach like Black people who have sort of that mindset, and thinking about like, and coming to terms and having a reckoning in that sense. But then also too, I wanted to kind of like, is also too a book that is about like history. It is about how we erase history, or like constantly sort of revising to suit a particular narrative. And I wanted to also reach white audiences in that sense, to have this recognition of the ways in which this happens, and the ways in which, right, that there are these patterns, right? Like history does repeat, and we're even sort of seeing this now, right? Like the ways in which things kind of come back again and again. So looking at the book and thinking about recognizing, hopefully, the way in which history repeats itself, right? And the ways in which there are connections from the past to the present, recognizing the ways in which we revise, ignore, or change history, and having a coming to terms with that also as well. So it's like this larger, I guess, like, because the book is marketed as horror, right? And so people are sort of thinking of it like as a reckoning, as like an actual sort of like reckoning of like white, like all these white people dying, and there is a little bit of that in there, right? But like part of it is also like this like a national reckoning that we need to have, right, in terms of how we have talked about history, how we have talked about race, right, and how we treat each other, and how all of these things have not just for Black people, like how all of these things have come to define how we think of ourselves, right? Both from a Black perspective, but also too from a white perspective. Like there's the character Celine, who like her identity is also too like tied to history. So just sort of kind of thinking about, right, like who we are, and right, and how much of that has been shaped by history, really. But that's a good question. That's a good question. It's like, it's something that I thought a lot about, right? Because it's, I don't know, like I do think, right, like as marginalized writers, like you have to, like, it's something that comes up, right? Like who is your audience, and how are you how are you going to reach them, right? I think we have to think about audience a little bit more. I could be wrong, but I don't know. I feel like it comes up more.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it comes up. Like, it comes up for the publisher, I think. Yeah, it definitely does for the publisher. Yeah.
That's true. I wanted to ask, so like, it's interesting to me that like she's, I don't want to say she's older, but like, I guess like, I feel like with a lot of these, like a lot of books, like there's the protagonist is like younger, like usually like late 20s, right? Or
yeah.
Like early 30s, and she's what, like she's in her late 30s. And so that was really interesting to me too, right? Like I think just to see a character who is in, we're not just getting the storyline that's told from like a Black character that we really see, but she's also too older. And I do think those portrayals not just of Black people, but like of that particular demographic are rare.
Yeah, there's like nothing. Like, there's very little. Yeah, I'm obsessed with 40. All I want to read about really is 40 and 50-year-old women, and like there's very little. And like, yeah, she. I mean, I'm basically, so she's queer. She's a Black woman. She's almost 40. I mean, I'm just like sweet. It's just like 10 people that I wrote this book for. I'm just kidding, but it's definitely really. But this, I mean, I wrote the book that a book that I really wanted to read. I mean, I wrote this book. I mean, there's a story that I've told a bunch of times now, but I was just looking for a funny book about Black people, like Extra Points for Queer. But like, I just wanted to laugh at something. I was like, I just want to laugh. I really need a funny book about Black people. And I asked people if they had one, and they were like, no. And I went on Twitter and people were like, not really. This is kind of satire, or definitely nothing about women and nothing queer. And they were just not, nobody had anything. This was a few years ago. And then, and so I was like, okay, well, nobody has anything, so I'm just gonna have to write a funny Black queer book. And so then I ended up writing Skye Falling. So yeah, it's definitely the book that I wanted to read and wanted to exist. And like I said, I'm in my 40s, and I'm interested in women in their 40s and in their 50s, and that's like, I guess it's like my thing, kind of. And there's not a lot of that content.
It's also like joyous, right? And I don't know, I was just talking to my students earlier today about like how I feel like I shouldn't even be saying this because my book is all about trauma, but like I feel like oftentimes with like Black stories, right? Like that's what's just all just talked about. It's like trauma, or it's like just all sad, right? And so it's like it's nice to see something. It's nice to see something else.
That was my goal. I was like, and look, I like a sad book. Like I read plenty of sad, like I read, I said Color Purple was my favorite book. I read all the things. I devour, books about Black women, and a lot of them, I mean, there's a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of trauma being written about, but I do think it's good to have something else. And I think a lot of it too is that, I mean, talk about the white gaze. I mean, I think a lot of it is that what white people, the Black books that white people will read are usually something that's like really sad, because white people want to feel like they think that they get it if they read about our pain. They think that that's how you like connect, that's how you understand, is through people's pain. I don't think that's really the way it happens, though. I think you have to kind of see the full spectrum of people's experiences. You got to see Black people just like being regular ass people. You got to just see like all, the entire experience. And that's how you connect. But I think there's this kind of narrative that the more pain, the better. And we see this in books, we see this in TV, we see this in movies, where they're just like outrageous shit. It's just like, why I even need to have all this, what is even all this happening for? And God forbid a Black woman can just be like vulnerable for a second on TV. But I think that has a lot to do with publishing, and a lot to do with white readers and what white readers want. But I think it's nice to have, and I don't write for white people. When I sit down and I write, I'm just thinking about the Black woman. I don't even explain shit. I think white people sometimes don't even understand. They don't even know. They're like, what is this reference? I asked your Black friend. I don't know. I'm not here to explain that to you. If you like the book, great, terrific. I'm happy for anybody to like the book. But I'm definitely writing for Black people, and for Black women in particular. I just would like to see more books that are about I mean, even you're just writing horror. I mean, even in the horror genre, like there's not, I don't, like I'm not getting I'm not seeing a bunch of Black women, books about Black women in horror, so I'm happy to see like, a whole bunch of stuff that I think's been missing.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, so like, I'm so curious about like voice, because like I really struggle with voice, and I think I struggled with it with this book, and like I mean, I guess it comes down to character, so maybe that was my issue, but like I noticed like with your book, right, like there's such a distinct voice, and such a clear character portrayal, right? And I guess I just wondering like how you thought about this, or how you did it, because I don't know, like this was the thing that we struggled with a lot, like in revisions, like I just on my end. And so I guess like I'm wanting some advice, I guess, because your book is really like, there's like just such a strong voice, such a strong character, right? And it comes out in your reading. And so like I'm wondering, like, how did did the voice come first for you? Like you talked a little bit earlier, right? Like that it was character, right, that came first for you, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it kind of depends sometimes on like what your point of view you're writing, and kind of like how you're choosing to tell the story. With Skye, it came really easily, I think, because Skye sounds like people I know. Skye is really familiar to me, and so Yeah, and also because a lot of the narrative is in her head, it's what she's thinking about. I think that gives you a lot of room to like, I think it makes it way stronger, because when it's mostly sort of what people are saying, you're a little bit more, constrained by what people actually say and like how they actually talk and how they actually communicate, which is often like, constrained. It's not, we only say certain things. We only, only certain parts of a show when we're talking. And so if you can get really into a character's head and do a lot of the narrative from there, you get something stronger. But yeah, I think I'm I think I'm just a really voicey, voicey kind of a writer. And I envy you and writers, like not envy, but like it's a different thing. But it's like sometimes I try to, I think, okay, well, maybe this story needs a plot, like, occasionally I'll think, oh, maybe my story does need a plot, and so sometimes I envy writers who have like a plot, like, oh wow, like you really like had look at these things that happened, and so that's great. Like I feel like you know how to do that, and I'm more of like I feel like I'm more of like she thought some things, she said some funny stuff. They had a conversation, I like the conversations between people. Like I like to just like sit two women in a room and just like, write this conversation that happens. And that's like the best thing in the world to me. And I write a whole book like that, but there's not really a bunch of shit that happens, so that's like a different thing, right?
That's so interesting, because I'm like the reverse of that. Like I'm always sort of thinking about like what is going to happen, and if I don't have anything happen, I start to get a little anxious, right?
Right.
So I don't know. It might be a fun exercise, I think, to try to just kind of like what you're saying, just like have people sit in a room and like what, I don't know if I could do it, because it always comes last, right? And so I don't know. Gosh, that's so fascinating to me, because like that was like one of the things that like struck out to me the most. I'm like, man, how do you do this? Because I can't, like, and it's always the thing that comes last for me. And then I have to kind of go back and like think a little bit more about like who these characters are and like how it's affecting their the scene, right? And their interactions with one another.
I mean, maybe though, but I also think there's a lot of, I think a book with a plot is also good, like sometimes you want to read a book where like stuff is happening and like, there's like I think that's also, sometimes a really cool, a lot of books with plots are, awesome books. And so that's also good. I just think it's like a different thing. And I think and maybe you can have both. Maybe you can do both things where there's a lot of plot and a lot of voice. I recently was reading, this book didn't work for me, but it was interesting in that Deacon King Kong. Have either of you read Deacon King Kong?
I've
Yeah.
It's like it's like an omniscient narrator. It has a lot of plot. It was a bit much for me. I feel like sometimes men, like they do there's a lot of stuff going on. I'm like, can somebody just sit down and have a conversation in this book, please? But it's like a lot of plot, a ton of plot. There's also a really interesting third person voice, and it's hard to get like a really, really good voice in third person also. The book didn't ultimately work for me because it was just too much going on, but it was really, the voice was really strong in a third person narrative with a really lot of plot. So I was like, okay, if he had like turned this to just like taken out like 6 of these storylines, this would be working. But like, but it's definitely an interesting and fun voice.
I just want to jump in really quick, just because we're running out of time. We have an audience question from Chastity Bozeman. They say, I assume that, like me, you have many book concepts that live in your mind. How do you personally choose which one to focus on and turn into a novel?
Oh gosh. That's a hard one. I don't know. Mia, do you have an answer for that one? I might have to think a little bit more, or I could try.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I also feel like I always have a lot. I always have a lot of ones in my mind. I think right now I'm writing 2 novels simultaneously because I can't choose which one I want to write. It's actually good for my attention span, but yeah, I think for me, I just kind of, I think about the stories a lot over time and kind of just let something sort of fill itself out more, I guess. If you have like 3, 4 different stories happening in your head, but like often like there are three or four different ideas, but like sometimes it's just like two characters who are like really, that you can really see and hear. And so then if you kind of just let those characters keep talking to you, and the more those characters become people, I think the more that you figure out, because it's one thing to have an idea of something, because an idea is not a book, you know, you also have to figure out, okay, this is a great idea, but like how is this a book? Like how, you know, like what goes on here? Like who are these characters? Who are they? How do they relate to each other? What is their arc? And so I have found sometimes that I had a really cool idea, 5 ideas, and like 3 of them were like just ideas that I really didn't have a good sense of the characters or a good sense of how I was going to tell the story. And those sort of fall away. And then the other things kind of solidify. And then maybe those other things come back later, you know, after you write the other ones. But that's been my experience.
Mm. This is a good question. And like, I think also too, I get it a lot because I do multiple genres, right? And so it's like, well, how do you decide between an essay or a story or a novel or nonfiction, right? And I don't know, like, I think I'm trying one, and then it's because like sometimes I'll write something, I think it's a book and it's not a book, it's like a story, right? And sometimes I think I'm writing a story and it's like, oh gosh, this is not this, right? And sometimes I think I'm writing an essay, right? And then it's just, right. So I think a lot of it is just sort of trial and error and hoping for the best. It's similar that you like, because you were talking about how you're kind of like thinking through, right? And I'm similar in that way too. Like I think a lot about something before I write it, or and I don't know if do you do a lot of drafts? Do you do a lot of like, because I don't do a lot of like, I do a lot of thinking through before I actually sit down to write. And so when I do sort of sit down to write, it goes quickly. But like, I have other friends who will do like, they'll write a draft and they go back and like revising and then doing a second draft and like a third draft, like that sort of process.
No, I always hope I can do that, but I never can do that.
Yeah, I don't do that either. I don't do that either. And I'm always really fascinated by it. And I try and it doesn't work out, right? And so like I'm always sort of thinking through it, right? And I used to spend a lot of time when I was in school, and I would get really frustrated because I think like I was taught that that's sort of the process. And as well as like this idea that you should be like always sort of writing, and like you should like designated times and you sit out and you try to write, right? And for me, it never worked because like I hadn't thought through something enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I sat down, I'm like trying to get words out on the page, but they were always like awful. And I knew they were awful because I hadn't thought through the thing. And so then I'm trying to do a draft, like it's just like me just sitting, and then I get frustrated, right? And so I don't know, like I think a lot of this is just sort of figuring out like what your own process is, and then just doing that and not listening to anybody else. But yeah, with the ideas, I don't know, like, and it's also too scary, I think, right? Like, because you can have like a book is such a whole other thing, because you could have an idea and you get into it, and then maybe you're 50 pages in and you realize that it's, you know,
that happens all the time.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And that's really hard, right? It's hard to like to make it this investment. I think that's the piece of it that's really what you have to deal with. Like how do you like keep going?
Totally.
But man, that's a good question.
Yeah, that was a great question to end on. We are pretty much at 9 o'clock over here on the East Coast. So I want to thank you, Mia McKenzie and LaTanya McQueen, for joining us this evening. I want to thank the audience for tuning in. Please, if you so decide to purchase Skye Falling or When the Reckonings Come, or Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, we humbly ask that you purchase them from Politics and Prose. All the links for the 3 books are in the chat. Our stores are open, and we thank you all for tuning in. Everybody have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.